Hey everyone, Dockwell here, and welcome to another one of my Dota 2 hero guides. Today we're going to be taking a look at Bane. So Bane is a support hero, pretty much only a support hero, and mostly a position 5 hero. It's really not played position 4, and that's largely because the hero's spells are just as good as they are and don't really scale all that well with items. There's not really too much utility that comes from all the items. Now, there's obviously the normal stuff like Force Staff, like Glimmer Cape, other things like that. This hero does have an okay Ags and Ags Shard, and some of them can be pretty valuable, but it's just not anything that you want to have. You know, you don't want to have this hero with a ton of net worth, because a lot of times what this hero does is they kind of bait spells out. You go in, you get some setup on an enemy, you save an ally, you get your long spell off for, you know, a gank or something like that, and then largely you don't really do all that much else in the team fight. You're just kind of one of these really annoying heroes that can kind of just mess with the fights and mess other people's initiations up. And then otherwise, if you're not doing that, you're just kind of being annoying, you know, and then maybe people will just go on you and kill you. You can be kind of tanky. He is an int hero that it's kind of deceivingly tanky because, you know, if you do get a Force Staff, Glimmer Cape, other things like that, you have a little bit of like life steal, I guess you would say, in one of his abilities. You also have an ability that kind of stops people from chasing you, all these other things. So it can be one of these annoying heroes. But largely, yeah, you don't want a lot of net worth on this hero because it's just good without it. Now, the other thing that this hero does mainly is it's a pretty good setup hero. And what I mean by that is basically one of your abilities just stuns people for a long time, but it's not a real stun. It's more just like kind of they are in a state where they're not allowed to be attacked, they're not allowed to be damaged. They kind of just, it's almost like a single version of Naga Siren's song. So it's basically just click that on an enemy, they kind of stay still, they stay put, it freezes them in place for a long duration so you can kind of set up on them. He also has a BKB piercing ultimate that is a very long duration ultimate that's channeling, so it can get interrupted, but it's very good for setup, for other stuns, for other spells. It's very good for ganking, you know, surprising people in side lanes and stuff like that. It can also be pretty good in, you know, team fights if you have good positioning. So positioning on this hero is very important. It's not a hero that you really want to run in. Now, maybe you want to run in first because you're going to get that setup on somebody that's alone. But in a 5-on-5 team fight, you kind of want to sit in the background because you want to be able to get your spells off, but you also want to be able to save people because the ability that he has to, you know, set up on people also allows you to save teammates kind of as well. It is a higher skill hero to save teammates, so I think Bane can be kind of difficult because saving teammates with your Nightmare is one of those things that's, you know, it's very important to learn how to do that on the hero, but it can kind of mess team fights up. You can mess things up with Nightmare if you don't use it correctly, or if you use it even on an enemy at the wrong time, those kinds of things. So it can be a difficult hero, but it can be a very annoying and high impact hero if you know how to use it right. It also can be a very strong laner as well because it trades very effectively. It's one of the best traders in all of Dota for position 5 heroes. I think probably the only better hero that trading is probably Ogre, but Ogre is a melee hero, and so because of that, this hero's ranged. You don't do a ton of right-click damage, but you trade extremely well because you have an ability, that Brain Sap, that basically trades your mana for HP, and you take HP away from the enemy. You pretty much just like get their HP and you take it from them. So it allows you to trade really well. You can also, like I said, set up on people in the lane. So if you have an aggressive carry that likes to dive, that has a stun of his own, or something that locks down and does extra damage over time and all those kinds of things, you can get a lot of kills in a lane with Bane. So Bane is a very good support for, you know, causing chaos in team fights, for being extremely annoying, for picking people off in the side lanes. It can be a very strong lane support if you match him up correctly with the right carry. But other than that, he can be a fairly difficult hero to play if you don't know how to use all of his abilities in the right way, or if you don't know how to position yourself in team fights in order to get off a long channeled ultimate and all of those kinds of things. So that's how to think about Bane. Now let's jump in and take a look at his abilities. So now that we understand Bane in general, we can take a look at his abilities and see how he's able to be that kind of annoying support that can set up really well, but also has positioning issues where you need to make sure you can get your abilities off in fights and other things like that, but you can pick people off really well. So actually the first ability we're going to take a look at is Enfeeble. It's the Q ability. This is his like weird, odd skill that everyone kind of forgets about. It's not really an ability that people really think about too much when they think about Bane. Some people probably don't even really know what it does because it's almost useless. I wouldn't be surprised if it actually gets changed soon in the future. I think this ability has been changed a bunch recently over the past few years. It constantly gets reworked because it's just this weird ability that doesn't really seem to have much of a place in his kit. But in any case, It's called Enfeeble. It lowers the enemy's attack damage, cast speed, and regen, all of those kinds of things, and it just gives them a debuff that does all this. So basically, you can cast it on the enemy, a little debuff appears, and then all of those things are reduced. So it's basically like an all-around debuff that just like negatively affects the enemy. It's very, very annoying to have that on you, but you can dispel it. You can, you know, take it off of you with Manta, anything like that. It's pretty easy to dispel, but it can just be one of those things that you're just casting this in team fights, you're casting it in the lane, you're casting it at times once it's maxed out, you know, later in the game, and it can just add that little bit of extra annoyance to the enemy is if they don't have something to purge it, or they don't have an ability to, you know, get rid of it or anything like that. It's just an extra bit of annoyance, but I wouldn't doubt if this eventually gets changed, just because it is very weird and doesn't really synergize with the rest of the kit. So that's Enfeeble. That's what it does. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Just a debuff, a negative debuff for the enemy. Now, the next thing we'll take a look at here is Brain Sap. So this ability is basically the trading ability. So what happens is you'll be man fighting somebody in a lane. Let's say you're man fighting a support or whatever. You know, you guys are trading hits, you're trading HP. Well, what happens is, especially because you're a ranged hero, not only is it beneficial to be a ranged hero against a melee, especially a melee 4, but what happens is then you can cast Brain Sap, and not only does it do a lot of damage, it actually does significant amounts of damage because it's pure damage, which is very unique. Not a lot of abilities do pure damage, especially normal, just, you know, average abilities that you can skill level 1. A lot of those don't do pure damage. So it does pure damage, but also steals life. So it heals Bane while also doing that pure damage to the enemy. So this is why he's such a good trade hero, because you can basically just sit there, trade HP. Like if you're clicking an enemy and you guys are basically trading similar amounts of HP, it's good for you, because then you can pretty much just take their HP, give it to yourself, and now you've like, not only if you won the trade, you're like giga stomping the trade. And if you have a carry that comes over in the laning phase or whatever and does a little bit extra, you can easily get kills with this ability and your trading potential. You can also really annoy the offlaner in the laning stage. It's also pretty good later in the game too. I mean, pure damage can never be counted out. It doesn't have the longest cooldown. You can use it many times in fights. You can get a little bit of the extra pure damage to secure kills when you gank and stuff like that. It just is an all-around good ability. I think pure damage can never really be counted out. So that's Brain Sap. Next, we're going to look at Nightmare. So Nightmare is the interesting skill that this hero has. It's probably the best skill, or the most versatile skill. It's the skill that everyone kind of thinks about when they think about Vayne. It's like kind of his quintessential skill. So what this does is you click it on an enemy hero. So we'll do it on the dummy target there. And you see this little animation happens, and now it's taking damage. But basically this enemy cannot do anything. So we see Axe runs around, Axe can cast abilities. Well, now I Nightmare Axe, and he's just kind of sitting there. If I select Axe, I can't move, I can't cast abilities, I can't do anything. I'm just sleeping for the duration. You can also see that while this happens, he's also taking a little bit of damage over time. It's just a little bit of damage. It's not a ton of damage. It's more damage obviously early on when they don't have as much HP. Axe has a good amount of HP, but he's taking some damage there, so that's important as well. Now, the thing to note about this is it's not just like the hero can't, you know, there's nothing that can happen to the hero. You can actually click the enemy if you are the Bane, so the Bane can actually do damage during the duration of sleep, but no one else can. So, what will happen is if you have an ally and you sleep the enemy and the ally tries to click this enemy, what will happen is the Nightmare will actually be transitioned, or like kind of go to the other player. And so we can show you this with another enemy. It works with enemies as well. So basically if I Nightmare this Axe, and then this Axe right clicks on that Axe, now he took the ability from it. But the same thing happens for your allies. You can see kind of why this can be annoying, because, you know, you might Nightmare your allies instead of the enemy if the ally tries to go on to the Nightmare target too early. Now, the one thing is, when you do Nightmare somebody, you can take the Nightmare off. So if the ally does, you know, end up getting the Nightmare, you can click Nightmare again and it immediately goes off. So just keep that in mind, that it is something that you can cancel. You can cancel it on the enemy, you can cancel it on your ally if they end up getting the Nightmare. Now, because you can Nightmare allies, it's actually something where you can save your allies potentially from spells, from things that will damage them. You can even save yourself. So you can cast it on yourself. You see right there, I cast it on myself, and for a short duration, it's like I don't even have a health bar. And that's largely because there's a small duration there where you're potentially, or essentially invulnerable. So you can see I cast it right there. There's nothing that anyone can really do to me for that short duration. So it's something that if you time it right, if you cast it on the enemy, it can be a mini, like, OD Astral Imprisonment. It can be a mini, like, Oracle spell. It can be something that just allows your teammate to kind of dodge spells. It can be almost, I think you can think of it a little bit like PA's invisibility, where she can cast it really quick and then jump out. It's just a small fraction of a second that you can have your enemies or yourself dodge spells, survive a little bit longer. It allows you to, get them out of maybe potentially a chain stun so they can pop BKB, all of that kind of stuff. So it's a very important spell to learn how to use it to save, but it's also something where you can potentially unintentionally or intentionally grief your teammates and those kinds of things too. So keep that in mind. Just something that you need to learn how to use this really well. Now, obviously, the other big thing is that once you do that, you can have something like Marana, which is the quintessential. It's like the typical thing everyone thinks about. Shoot an arrow from long range, and then once the stun goes in and once the enemy takes damage from a non-right-click spell, then that Nightmare goes off, and basically then you can start hitting them and stuff like that. So it is something to potentially set up other stuns. Now, lastly, the other thing to keep in mind is that you can use Brain Sap there, so I can click this enemy a bunch and then use Brain Sap there at the end to get the maximum amount of damage. So this is why Bane can do significant amounts of damage there to the enemy when you Nightmare and then you Brain Sap, and then, you have an ally come in and potentially help you out. And you see how once I use that Brain Sap, it did end the Nightmare. So you don't really want to do that till the very, very end of the Nightmare. So that's how you can use those abilities in concert. Now, those are all of Bane's normal abilities. The last one is Fiend's Grip. So Fiend's Grip is actually pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It pierces BKB, pierces spell immunity, and does pure damage. And what it does is you just click it on an enemy, and it's just a channeled ultimate that locks them in place. They can't do anything. They can't cast abilities or anything. It just does damage over time, and there's a very, very long stun, as you can see. So it's one of these abilities that it's really, really good against BKB. It's really, really good against, like, locking people down in a fight or whatever, any kind of key hero for a long time, especially if the enemy doesn't have any stuns. You could potentially use your Glimmer Cape or something like that. You can do this, and then you just go there. Now you're invisible. It's very, very hard for them to see you, all of that kind of stuff. It's just one of these abilities that can do a lot in team fights, but it also allows you to pick people off really, really well. So this is one of the ways you can combo all of these spells is you can Nightmare them, then you can wait for your team to come. You click a little bit, you do this, and then before the Nightmare ends, you can basically cast your ultimate, and now you're getting this extremely, extremely long duration stun. It's very, very effective, and then at the very end, you can Brain Sap them. So you can alone do a ton of damage just yourself as Bane, and then in concert with any other hero, you can pick off pretty much any hero in the game. Obviously, Lincoln's is a big counter to these single target spells, but still, it's very, very effective. Now, clearly, as you can see, with this long channel, with this kind of long stay in position ability, all of this kind of stuff, this hero can have positioning problems. It's very, very important to learn how to position yourself correctly with this hero, because when you do so, if you just cast your ultimate randomly and there's a global silence from Silencer, there's easy stuns, easy hexes from the enemy, they're just immediately going to cancel it. It's going to be very easy. So you need to kind of sit in the back, wait for the right times to cast your abilities and those kinds of things in team fights. It can be very difficult. And the last thing that I will show you is actually this Ag's Scepter, because I think it is kind of important on the hero. It's not something that you're going to do a ton or use a ton. We'll just get it here. But basically what Ags does is it creates two illusions of yourself that are also channeling Fiend's Grip, and basically all three of you have to be stunned in order for the Fiend's Grip to end. So you can actually cast it and then just walk away. But basically the Fiend's Grip will not end unless all of them are stunned. So we'll give Axe this call here, and we'll do this again. We'll cast this on here. We can see Axe calls these two, and that one immediately disappears, but this illusion is still there and still casting that ability. So it's one of these things that this is kind of one of the biggest things that with a little bit of extra gold, you can be even more effective with your ultimate, but it's one of these things that as a 5 position, as a Bane, with no real farming spell for waves, it's very, very hard to get this amount of money. You kind of just sit around helping save people and setting up ganks, but you don't get a lot of farm yourself usually on this hero. But it is just something to keep in mind. It can be very, very effective when you end up getting it if it goes late and those kinds of things. So that's Bane. Those are his abilities. Now let's jump into a game and see how he's played. So now we're jumping into a replay of Insania playing Bane here, and I just wanted to show you the basics of the laning stage. So with 5 positions, usually they're not all that complicated in terms of you just do the same thing for most 5 positions. It just matters, how they trade and how they're effective in the laning stage, other than just, doing the typical stacking and stuff like that. So you can see how he's playing in the lane here, and he's pretty much going for harass as much as possible on the Tide or on the Weaver whenever he gets a chance. Obviously, you put a ward down, which helps them harass the enemy there and see the Weaver whenever possible. But you see how he's basically using Brain Sap to make these trades really good. Now, he did get a denial on the range creep, so it's one thing with most 5 positions, you want to make sure that you're trying to either secure the range creep or deny it with, your carry and things like that. But you see how he walks over here after, contesting that first wave and just immediately starts trading with this Weaver. And because he has that sentry down, it just allows him to just be a really, really good trade hero against the Weaver. It's just very, very hard for almost any hero to trade with Bane when he has the mana to Brain Sap, pretty much. So level 1, he goes as Brain Sap. It's just the best trading ability, one of the best in the game because of just how it works with pure damage and all those kinds of things. So you can see how the Weaver, typically Weaver is a pretty strong 4 position that isn't very scared of many heroes because he can usually, obviously, Sakuchi away, he can get some damage and all these kinds of things, but you can see how Bane is just being super aggressive here early on, just getting harass damage in, and no one really wants to contest him. The Weaver can't find the, ward that he put down there, even if he had one for himself, and until they basically push the wave in and they know for a fact that the Phantom Lancer can't help the Bane, they don't wait until then to actually go onto him, and even then they aren't able to. So you can see how this is just an effective tool for him to zone out the Weaver, to be really effective at trading, making sure the Weaver doesn't pull the big camp as much as possible, all of that kind of stuff, and then coming in here and hitting the Tide whenever possible, just get a little bit extra harass, be super annoying to these offlaners and these 4 positions. This is just what Bane does. It's just typical. And obviously, he's doing other things, like he's trying to contest to make sure they can't pull, other things like that. He'd probably be going to check the small camp. He has a ward here, but he would look at the small camp to see if it's blocked and those kinds of things for him to pull, all of that typical 5-position stuff. But this is kind of just like a Bane specialty. Not very many ranged heroes like this, ranged intelligence heroes, would be able to play this aggressive against heroes like Bane currently is doing. It's just very Bane-centric in this way because of how strong Bane is. And this is just how you play Bane as a 5-position. You can obviously sometimes, Weaver's one of these heroes where he can escape, but a lot of times you can get people down. You can trade very, very low to, almost no health on Bane, then use your Brain Sap, secure a kill, things like that. We can just see how effective this is here from him. So that's pretty simple. That's pretty straightforward. That's pretty much Bane's laning stage. It's not more complicated than that. Now, obviously, you need to be sure that your positioning is good. You're still an int hero. You're still pretty squishy. If you get stunned, if you get gone on, if it's a 2v1 situation, you're not going to be able to trade. So like right here, as soon as he gets that Tide Gush on him, he knows that he has to be very careful, especially because he already used Brain Sap. So it's one of those things that you do need to be aware of. Bane isn't just like, he's not Ogre. You can't just go in and just completely tank everyone, including creeps. But he does trade very well like we see here. So that's pretty much Bane's laning stage. That's how to play him. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple from there. The next thing I'm going to show you is the transition from the laning stage to kind of this early game portion where you're going to want to either gank or take a lane with Bane. In other words, you're going to want to sit in a lane and potentially soak XP. Because you're fairly tanky, can trade pretty well, it can be sometimes difficult to dive you under tower. So because of that, if your carry needs to go to jungle, you can do that. Otherwise, if your carry can stay in the lane by themselves because you ended up securing a lane for them, you can do something like this. Now, obviously, the mid and the Snapfire there were able to use their abilities to stun the Razor, but he also committed his Brain Sap. It did a lot of damage there. It did like a fourth of his damage. It did so much, or a fourth of his HP. It did like so much damage there at the very end to make sure they secured the kill. But you can also do stuff like this, where you see a hero, and then you use your, obviously, Nightmare to get a good setup, and then the enemy comes in with a stun, or I mean, your ally comes in with a stun to secure the kill, all that kind of stuff. This is the perfect example of how to use Bane transitioning out of the laning stage into that kind of early to mid-game timing where you don't just want to be useless. You don't just want to do nothing. You're not a hero that farms waves very quickly. You're not a hero that really does all that much other than going around the map, finding setup for kills to pick people off with your Nightmare and with your Brain Sap. You see how much damage that level 3 Brain Sap does at this point in the game. It's just absolutely insane how much damage you can do. So this is kind of what you want to do. Hopefully you want to secure a lane for your carry to either, to sit in that lane, probably farm, transition to jungle, and do that rotational thing like I've talked about in other guides, and then you run around the map looking for Nightmare setups to kill people and things like that, or, go to mid, go to the side lane, the other side lane, the off lane, try to kill the carry, all that kind of stuff, and that's exactly what you want to do with Bane after the laning stage ends. So basically, for the last few minutes, he's been running around, assisting in kills, like I talked about, like I showed you just before. He got a kill on the Alchemist, another kill on Razor, those kinds of things. But this is also what you want to do. It's not just killing people that you want to be able to do. You also want to assist your allies in kind of preventing ganks. So you see right there, the Tide was about to Ravage. He had Ravage available. He was going to Ravage because he pretty much knew that the Void Spirit didn't really have any other spells to get out. He used pretty much all of his spells already. but the Bane comes in, does a little bit of damage, nightmares the Tide, doesn't allow him to get off that spell, and saves his mid player. So that's another thing you can do with Bane. It's not just about, setting up for ganks. It's also about coming in, assisting, anybody that is getting ganked, whether that means you're nightmaring your ally or nightmaring the enemy team so they can't dive, so they can't get off key spells, all of those kinds of things. I just wanted to show you that little clip because it's very, very important to not just sit around and do nothing with Bane. You want to be able to, effectively use your spells to either gank or save people throughout pretty much the entirety of the mid-game portion until, it gets very dangerous for you to show yourself otherwise. Now, the next thing I want to show you is basically a mid-game team fight. They're protecting a tower here. The enemy has a small lead, but they do have an alchemist. But the enemy basically just wants to push down this tower. It's half HP. They have some heroes that can do it, they think. They have Tide. They have this Jakiro, those kinds of things. They want to push down this tower. So you can see how Bane, he's just sitting in the back, but he's looking for a perfect opportunity to get spells off on the enemy to make sure that he can lock everybody down. You see how he nightmared the Razor, but then forced the Jakiro to take the Nightmare off, and then he used his ultimate on the Razor when he knew that the Jakiro basically wasn't there to end up stopping. Once he knew that the threat of Ravage was gone because it was used and the Tide died, and the threat of the Ice Path to stop the ultimate was also gone because the Jakiro was nightmare because he took it off of the Razor. That's the perfect opportunity then to use his ultimate, and you can get basically guarantee the full channel duration. So I think that's just a perfect example of how Bane used his abilities. Insania used the abilities of Bane and the positioning of Bane perfectly. He understood exactly what he needed to do, exactly where he needed to position himself in the fight, so he missed getting hit by Ravage, but also secured 2 extra kills on the enemy heroes that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise if he didn't use his spells in that way. So that's, I think, a perfect example of how to take mid-game team fights with this hero. So now the last thing I want to show you here is, obviously he's been, assisting with ganks and all the stuff in the same way that I've told you about, sitting in the back of his team, behind his team, protecting them and all this stuff. But this is exactly how you want to play late-game team fights. So I want to show you exactly what he does on Bane here. He's sitting out of vision. He's sitting in the back as much as possible. He's nightmaring, obviously, his team to try to save his teammate. A great job there. But watch what he does. He's sitting in the back. He waits for Ravage to go off. And then he waits right here. He knows the other stun is the Jakiro Ice Path. As soon as Ice Path is down and used, now he knows no Ravage, no Ice Path. There's nothing the enemy can do. He immediately nightmares the Alchemist, knows the Alchemist stun is the only other stun in the game pretty much, and he can just use it on Alchemist, use his Nightmare on Alchemist, or his ultimate, his Fiend's Grip on Alchemist to get the full duration off. They kill Alchemist. It puts the rest of the enemy in a bad position because they have to try to cancel that or, help the Alchemist after he gets hooked and all of that kind of stuff. That was just the perfect team fight from Bane there. He waited to use, he used his spell, his original Nightmare, to save the Pudge from initially getting gone on. Perfect example of using Nightmare there. And then he kind of sat in the back, didn't get gone on, didn't waste any of his spells, and then used his Nightmare and his Fiend's Grip at the perfect time after he knew that all the rest of the stuns in the game were cast and there's nothing that could then stop his channeled ultimates. I think that's just the perfect example of how to play Bane in a late game team fight. You just have to calculate when all the spells are getting cast, what cancels your ultimate, what to do to be most effective with your spells, and position yourself perfectly in the team fight to actually have impact while not just getting all of your spells, uselessly canceled and stuff like that as well. So I think that's the perfect example. I hope this guide helped you guys understand how to play Bane. It can be kind of a simple hero when you think about it, but it can be somewhat difficult to execute in the actual game and coordinate with your team and all of those kinds of things and position yourself correctly in team fights to get all of those abilities off and make sure they're effective. So that's Bane. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. As always, like, comment, subscribe, all of those kinds of things. All the links are below for my Discord if you want to join there, just have discussions or request a replay review. My Twitch is below as well, where I do replay reviews. I usually do them once a week, every Friday, if not more. I'll try to be doing them more in the future. My Patreon is also below as well, there for coaching if you want to get coached or you just want to support me to help me keep doing these videos. I'm, for whatever reason, not getting ads. I'm not getting approved for ads on YouTube for some reason. I'm not really sure why. I have, been trying for the past 4 or 5 months and have yet to get it. So the only way I really get anything out of, making these videos is if you guys support me. So I really hope that more of you choose to do that, and I would really appreciate it if you do. So as always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.